Hello, I'm Fast Lawyer. Today we're going to do a review for Trickster VR Co-op Dungeon Crawler, a game that was officially released on January 15th, 2019 out of early access by Super Static, but it was originally released on the Steam store back on August 12th, 2016. So it's a pretty old classic VR dungeon crawler. It's available for all the VR major headsets. It normally retails for $13. It's on a current Steam sale, 30% off. I actually bought this game on the Oculus store for a little less than $5. I tested this game out on the Oculus Quest 2 using the Oculus Link cable. Trickster VR is a classic VR dungeon crawler. It was one of the early ones and it was really enjoyable back in the day, but now in 2021 it's a bit outdated, and the question is it still worth playing? So I put some time in to answer that question, and unfortunately my answer is it just depends. There is a fun gameplay loop to be found here. Unfortunately, you're gonna have to look past a lot of issues that this game has just from its outdated mechanics. There are several things wrong with Trickster VR Dungeon Crawler. The biggest thing is the combat. The combat is just too basic. It was fine for the early days of VR, and in fact there are some interesting mechanics here. There's different types of enemies and there's different weapons, and the weapons work differently to change up the gameplay, and the enemies attack differently, so you do have a little bit of strategy. Unfortunately, what strategy there is just too simple, and at the end of the day it's just whether you get overrun by the horde or not, which unfortunately depends a lot on your weapon upgrades. Are you able to dish out enough damage to take out the enemy hordes fast enough? And the more enemies there are on screen, just the less strategy there seems to be. You either have enough weapon upgrades to dispatch them quickly, or you don't and you'll end up dying. So it's just not really a fun gameplay loop the longer that you play this game. It's fun at first, and it definitely is fun trying out the different weapons, the different special abilities, and then you see the different types of enemies, and that sounds pretty cool. But at the end of the day, not only is the combat too shallow, but there are some fundamental broken things about the combat. For example, the bow and arrow mechanic here is very outdated, and it'll go sideways if you pull too far. You gotta set it right in the settings to how far you want to pull, and then just be careful not to pull too far, otherwise your bow will go sideways and you won't shoot anything. Then there's the melee, which lacks any real physics. Instead, your damage output will be predetermined by the base weapon stats, so it really won't matter too much how hard you swing or how fast. The damage output will be based on the weapon stats themselves, not your physical swings in your physical space. Now, there are some cool things about the combat. For example, if you hit an armored enemy in one of their armored areas, he won't cause any damage if you're using a physical weapon, so you have to be careful and swing into one of their unarmored spots, or when you shoot a bow and arrow, to hit one of their exposed areas. However, magical weapons will go through the armor. Unfortunately, even this fails when there's a horde of enemies coming at you, because it can be very difficult to see exactly where you're swinging when you're just surrounded by enemies all around. It can get a bit too hectic, and the combat loses any strategy that it might otherwise have had. The enemy AI and even the boss AIs are pretty outdated, and I found the boss fights just weren't that interesting, and the trash on the way to the boss just was not interesting to fight. Really, the only thing that kept my interest was just trying different weapons and upgrading them and seeing what the special abilities were. But once you got farther into the game and then you start seeing the same types of enemies and the same type of layouts, and you notice the maps really don't look that much difference. Yes, there are some differences between the realms, but the different levels, the different objectives, they all are way too similar. The maps are just very mundane, very drab, and not interesting to look at. And it doesn't help that most of the interactions are very outdated with, the basic point and click, push a button to activate an ability, push a button to open a chest. You don't use modern VR interactions that we're used to now in 2021. However, I can see that the simplicity of the gameplay might be attractive for co-op dungeon crawling. This is a game that's easy to get into, easy to understand, so I can see that this game might still have some appeal if you're specifically looking for multiplayer online co-op dungeon crawling. Trickster VR is running on the Unity engine. On my RTX 3080, I was getting steady 90 frames per second. You do have full locomotion and snap turning available. However, I found several pathing issues during this game that made the locomotion in this game less than ideal. There were lots of times where I would get stuck in the terrain and it was very frustrating. I also noticed that the audio would cut in and cut out, and enemies would go below the floor at times. I would have liked to seen some graphical settings available because I know not everyone has a top-end VR rig, and although the game ran fine on my RTX 3080, I can imagine this game wouldn't run fine on lower end systems, especially when there's lots of enemies on screen. Trickster VR has up to 4-player co-op. It was one of the top 3 dungeon crawlers back in the day, along with VR Dungeon Knight and Carnage Chronicles. And I know some of you might say, what about Vanishing Realms? Yeah, Vanishing Realms is a cut above all of those 3, but I consider that to be more than just a dungeon crawler. Unfortunately, time has not been kind to Trickster VR. It's just too outdated for me to recommend, and they have to give this game a score now in 2021. I would give it a 5 out of 10, and I think I'm doing that mostly on nostalgia. Look, there is a fun gameplay loop here with the new weapons and the upgrades and the special abilities, but the core gameplay is just not dynamic enough to keep you interested for more than a few hours, and I just can't recommend it. Anyways, I'm Fast Lawyer. If you liked my review, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And as always, have a wonderful day. Goodbye.
Marvelous. They're even uglier from up close, aren't they? No wonder they get so angry all the time.